Good evening, morning, afternoon, or whatever time it may be for you. You are about to listen to a Royal Mirror audio story. The audio will be accompanied with visuals to enhance the experience. However, if you prefer to simply listen, they aren't necessary. If you'd like to follow along, or would simply prefer to read the story, you can find a link to the text in the description below. I hope you enjoy. Now, on to our tale. War. Another reality. The Vortex of New Valois. Part 3. Voodoo and Liam made their way through the ruined streets of New Valois, carefully navigating around broken down vehicles and debris from the storm. They'd left the safety of Valois Hospital 4 hours ago, and, according to Liam, were a little over halfway to their objective. The clouds still closed in overhead, but the rain had let up for most of their journey. They'd spent most of their time walking in silence. Clearly, the night was perfectly comfortable with it, but to Liam, it felt awkward. The few times the silence had been broken, they'd mostly discussed unserious topics, like the history of New Valois, things Liam liked to do, places Liam liked to go in the city before the storm and the plague hit. However, there was one serious discussion that Liam desperately wanted to bring up. What would happen if they had another run-in with a scavenger like Silas? Whether it was due to the paramedic's anxiety over this pressing question, or just his desire to break the silence, Liam didn't really know. Regardless, as he vaulted over a crashed Taiga automated delivery bot, its rotor blades still spinning slightly in the wind, he found himself raising the issue with the knight. Voodoo, if we encounter a situation like the one with that scavenger when we first met, I need you to do something for me. Liam looked at Voodoo expectantly, but the warrior neither encouraged nor discouraged him from making his request, allowing the paramedic to make the next move. I need you to try and de-escalate situations like that, not escalate them. The knight continued walking through the ruined streets, though Liam thought he detected the faint sounds of a laugh coming from Voodoo's helmet, just barely audible over the sound of the knight's metal boots crunching over scrap metal and broken glass.
I suppose I'm not exactly sure what you mean,
Voodoo replied, looking back towards the paramedic as he did so. The knight gave a subtle, quizzical tilt of his head.
The scavenger pointed his rifle at me, pulled the trigger and started charging it. The situation escalated. I indicated I was willing to defend myself. The scavenger lost his nerve and his weapon discharged harmlessly. The situation de-escalated.
It was hard to believe that the knight was already having an influence on him. He couldn't help but smile at Voodoo's simplistic recounting of the scenario. Yes, well, it turned out better than I could have hoped for, but don't you think you could have used your words instead of waving your pistol around? Voodoo paused, held up his hand, then brought it to the bottom of his helmet, as if he was stroking his chin.
I did use my words. I told him I was armed. Does that count?
No! Liam responded, with as much vitriol as he could manage. He detected another chuckle, as Voodoo waved for them to continue walking. The paramedic obeyed, but he was intent on being heard out. You don't know what would have happened if the looter had actually shot you, he explained to Voodoo, trying to appeal to the knight's own sense of personal safety, as well as sympathy for any opposition they may face. Voodoo continued to march forward, and Liam was beginning to have a hard time determining if the knight was even hearing him. The warrior seemed singularly focused on the path ahead. Liam tried a new angle, to get through the knight's figurative metal shell. Imagine if you were in his position, Voodoo. Massive, metal-clad soldier invading your city? You'd want to defend yourself. Wouldn't you feel better if the armored man with overwhelming firepower gave you space instead of threatening you, talked to you, indicated that he meant you no harm? Voodoo raised a single finger to his helmet, making a universally recognized signal to be quiet. Liam furrowed his brow in annoyance, and his jaw dropped incredulously. Liam leaned towards the knight aggressively and began his reprimand. Voodoo, I've tolerated a lot, but that's not an acceptable way to end a conversation. Use your words. At least tell me to—
Hildy? Shields. Liam, down.
The paramedic tilted his head in confusion. Then he finally heard it. The metallic clanking and the explosive pop of some sort of weapon firing off. Liam turned his head and spotted it immediately. Tripod legs, cylindrical body, relatively functionless urban camouflage color scheme. Liam had been around enough police and corpo security to know a Misericord enforcement droid when he saw one. He had a low opinion of most security companies, but he held a special sort of loathing in his heart for Misericord. A sinking feeling gripped the paramedic's stomach as his eyes fixated on the bot. It was lumbering towards them, about twice the size of a human, but at this distance, it looked a bit like someone had made some choice enhancements to a standard public trash bin. It had a grenade launcher on one arm and a railgun on the other, plus enough armor to withstand any small arm a street punk would be able to get his hands on. Or, so his police buddy, Roland, had told him. Liam stared at the combat robot like a deer in the headlights, though his lack of action would have resulted in the grenades the droid had fired making his body look more like ground beef than venison. Fortunately for Liam, Voodoo's armored body slammed into him, and the knight's arms wrapped around him. The paramedic watched as the droid's grenade slammed into Voodoo's shield, a red shimmer pulsing into view around each of the 3 detonations. Microscopic nanomachines closed rank to absorb both the kinetic and chemical impact of the weapons, protecting both Voodoo and the man he was defending from the blast. The ruby glare of the shield dissipated as the nanomachines either fell broken to the street below or dissipated, becoming invisible to the human eye once more. A rough tug pulled the straps of Liam's paramedic gear taut around his torso, and he was lifted up from the ruined road below. He looked over his shoulder to see Voodoo picking him up by his clothes. He then felt himself being tossed behind a massive upright slab of concrete and rebar that had clearly dropped from one of New Valois' skyscrapers to its current resting place earlier in the storm. The ground came up to meet Liam, and he felt glass bite into his hands and rubble scrape against his skin. But it was better than white-hot metal shrapnel from a grenade. He skidded onto his stomach and turned his head, just in time to see Voodoo hunker down behind the engine block of a burned-out vehicle, peeking his head over it to observe the bot. More grenades landed, but slammed harmlessly into the massive piece of rubble and the vehicle that they were hiding behind. Liam noticed an omnipresent ringing in his ears for the first time since the battle began, and it took him a moment to realize that Voodoo's helmeted head was bobbing up and down. The knight was trying to talk to him.
Liam! Hey! Liam! Are you alright?
The paramedic managed to give the knight a shaky thumbs up and nod of affirmation. For now, at least, their current position protected them from the droid, and the paramedic had only superficial injuries. Voodoo looked over his shoulder pauldron at the combat robot once more.
What do you think, Liam? Should I try to talk to it?
The knight asked. Even with the mechanical clanking of the droid and the crack of the grenades, the paramedic could hear that Voodoo was smirking under that helmet.
Do you think negotiation would work? Maybe he's just looking for his power cable. Too bad I don't know binary, or whatever these things speak these days.
Liam gave the knight his best scowl and shouted over the din. "Fuck you, Voodoo! Scrap that fucking thing!" The other man gave the paramedic a simple nod.
Ah, with pleasure. Hilde, Sabo.
Liam watched as a compartment on the knight's armor shot open while he removed the magazine from his weapon. He dropped it into the compartment and outshot another into his waiting hand. He gripped it tightly and slammed it into the ivory-colored rifle. The size of the magazine well changed dynamically to accommodate the larger ammunition. The barrel rotated outward, readying itself for the heavy, armor-piercing bolts the knight was preparing to lob at his target. Voodoo broke from the cover the vehicle had provided him and twirled to aim his weapon at the machine. The section of his armor containing his munitions automatically slid closed with a metallic hiss. Liam pressed his palms against his ears as tightly as possible in a vain attempt to prevent another assault on his eardrums, this time by the knight's gun. Voodoo pulled the trigger, and a brilliant flash of light erupted from the barrel of his weapon. Liam felt the shockwave in his teeth and shut his eyes as round after round of ammunition filtered through Voodoo's Excalibur. Large, spent casings clattered around his metal-booted feet. The outline of the war machine was highlighted in the heads-up display of Voodoo's helmet. A comprehensive scan by his sensor suite displayed the status of his quarry in the top right-hand corner of his vision. Sparks skittered off the front armored plate of the combat robot. Voodoo's status readout indicated no signs of penetration or meaningful damage against it. The knight grimaced and advanced across the ruined street towards the adversary as more grenades flew through the air. Fire and shrapnel splattered against Voodoo's shield as he adjusted his fire lower, away from the armored body of the bot and towards its tripod legs. Here, his work was much more effective. Hot bolts of metal slammed into the motors of the robot's foreleg, and it swayed forward and off balance.
Front servo error. Front servo error.
A calm female voice resonated from the droid's internal speakers, indicating its distress as its other legs readjusted to better support and maneuver itself with its crippled limb. However, even with its mobility hampered, the machine could still use its weapons. Voodoo felt the next grenade slip through his weakened shields and slam into his chest. It detonated, throwing pieces of equipment that had only been secured to Voodoo's body with fabric straps across the ruined street. Liam let out a gasp as he watched a platinum-colored pistol, Voodoo's sidearm, skitter across the ground, knocked out of the knight's holster by the force. The paramedic peered over the rubble he hid behind to see Voodoo still moving forward towards the bot, almost unhindered by the strike. Voodoo slid to take cover behind a smaller collection of rubble, slamming his back against it, turning towards the paramedic in the process. Liam saw that the knight's armored chest plate was barely scratched by the impact, and realized that the bot's grenades must not be effective against Voodoo's suit. Unfortunately, the bot's AI must have come to the same conclusion, as its grenade launcher was deactivated and its railgun was starting to charge. Clearly, it intended to use its higher velocity projectiles to punch through Voodoo's armor. The knight was doing some strategic planning of his own. He'd faced these combat robots hundreds of times in virtual reality training. They were fearsome head-on, but if he could manage to flank it, there were plenty of nice, soft, sensitive areas, like its ammunition supplies and power plant, he could easily get rounds into. With its maneuverability crippled, it would be simple enough to get a good angle on it. There was a large commercial transport truck in front of Voodoo. He would be able to use the trailer for cover to get close, then poke his rifle through the gap between the trailer and the cab to eliminate the threat. Voodoo got up and leveled his rifle again, laying down suppressive fire to overwhelm the bot's sensors and its AI decision cycle. Its aim was thrown off, but unlike the human scavenger the knight had previously encountered, the emotionless robot would not hesitate. An energetic hum vibrated off of the bot's railgun appendage, and it opened fire, spitting 5 rounds in the knight's direction. In spite of the battering his shield had taken, they still managed to stop 1 round cold before it struck his torso. Voodoo felt another round ricochet off of his right thigh plate, while the rest of the bolts missed completely. A metallic clang reverberated off of the ruined skyscrapers around them as the knight's shoulder plowed into the commercial vehicle's trailer. He was safely in cover again. The knight slid along the chrome edging of the trailer quickly, but subtly, moving with surprisingly little noise, even in such heavy armor. As he approached the gap, he visualized the target in his mind, imagining aiming at its weak ammo stowage and firing. He knew he would have to be fast to take out the bot before it could react. He leaned out around the trailer and, true enough, the gap between it and the cab provided a perfect view of the droid, just as he'd imagined it. He replayed the scenario in his head, moving the weapon's artificial crosshair in his helmet's HUD over that bulky ammo box behind the bot's railgun. 3 rounds erupted from his Excalibur and slammed into the railgun's ammunition stowage. Voodoo sighed in relief, waited for the blast, and nothing happened. Nothing happened, that is, until the bot turned its railgun on Voodoo and fired a round directly into his helmet. Voodoo! Liam cried out in terror from his relatively safe vantage point as he watched the railgun round penetrate the knight's faceplate. Panic sent adrenaline flowing through his veins. There was little the paramedic could do, of course. Medicine wasn't going to help much if that round landed true, and he was no warrior. Still, Liam's eyes fell on Voodoo's pistol, and he scrambled for it, satisfying his need to feel like he was doing something about his situation. The knight's back slammed into the concrete beneath him. The screens on the inside of his helmet that had shown him the outside world had gone black, and he was staring directly at the tip of the steel bolt driven partway through the front of his helmet. He felt the warmth of blood trickle down his face, some minor spalling having ripped into his forehead.
Mailed.
He mumbled to himself. He'd forgotten that the Block 80 upgrade for the enforcement droid had removed the volatile batteries packaged in the ammunition stowage and tied the railgun directly to the power plant. All he'd hit was a stack of metal rods. No wonder the bot hadn't brewed up. His gauntlet-covered fingers went for his helmet release, and he lifted it off of his head, revealing a short blonde haircut stained with red and a grimace on his sharp, clean-shaven face. Voodoo's eyes turned up from the ground, just in time to see the combat bot's legs ripping the cab away from the trailer and pushing it to the side, so that the droid's torso could squeeze through the gap. Its armor scraped against the metal of the vehicle as it pressed its way past the trailer towards the wounded warrior. Voodoo scrambled for his rifle as the bot's railgun whined, charging once more. The bot pointed its weapon at the knight, and a sharp hiss filled the air as the energy built up in the weapon was discharged. Except, this time, no projectile was fired.
Feed error. Feed error.
The robotic voice emitted from the bot once again. The optical sensor on top of the machine swiveled on its gimbal to take in the damage Voodoo's rounds had done to its ammo stowage. Once its onboard AI decided there was no chance of getting that weapon functional again, its grenade launcher reactivated. Voodoo, however, was quicker on the draw. Without his helmet, the knight didn't have his sensor suite giving him a constantly calculated impact point for his weapon. But at this distance, he didn't need one. He nestled his eyes to the weapon's backup sight, brought it over the droid's grenade rack, and fired. One shot rang out. Then there was a cacophony of noise as all of the Enforcer droid's remaining grenades went up in one massive explosion. Voodoo shielded his eyes with his gauntlet as the Force ripped open the entire right side of the droid and toppled it off of its legs.
Processor error. Processor error. Catastrophic damage. Shutting down.
The droid's own onboard voice confirmed Voodoo's victory. Cooling fluids and lubricants oozed out of the droid's ruined chassis and over the dagger-shaped misericord emblem. It was a suitable reward of artificial viscera for a good hunt. The knight let out a sigh of relief. He wiped some of the blood and sweat off of his face and pushed himself up to his feet. "Voodoo, are you all right?" Liam called out as he left the safety of the rubble and started to run towards the knight. The man gave the paramedic a cocky smirk as he reached up to touch the small wounds on his forehead. "A little shrapnel to the old CPU might stop a droid like that, but it's not gonna stop me." He let out a small chuckle before jerking his thumb back down the street. "But we'd better get moving. That droid was definitely meant for us, and its operator might still be..." The sound of another railgun firing filled the air, echoing through the near-empty streets of New Valois. The bolt made a sickening wet crunch as it slipped past Voodoo's chestplate and pauldron to sink into his right shoulder. The knight found himself once again collapsing onto his back, while Liam dove to his belly in a panic. Silas, the scavenger they'd encountered at Voodoo's landing zone, emerged from the alleyway where he'd been hiding. Losing that droid's gonna put me back some. But I think what I'll get for that armor will more than cover it," the scavenger said as he sauntered forward, loading another battery and pack of bolts into his rifle. "Even if the armor won't stop an M1. Voodoo looked at the scavenger as he tried to raise his Excalibur. The new wound prevented him from lifting his weapon. He let out a grunt of pain. "Slipping through a gap in the plates doesn't count," the knight told his assailant as the other man slowly moved towards him. The scavenger laughed as he finished loading his rifle and aiming it towards Voodoo's unarmored head. "Well, whatever the case may be, I don't think your skull is up to the task of stopping a bolt." The knight gave the scavenger a less confident smirk than he was used to. "Don't bet on it." Voodoo shot back as the scavenger's M1 finished charging. He curled up, covering his head with his arms, trying to get as much of his armor between his face and the scavenger's gun as possible. Voodoo jumped as the sound of a gunshot went off. But it definitely wasn't the railgun. The knight probably would not have even heard it if it had been. No. He'd recognized the sound of his own sidearm anywhere. He slowly uncovered his face and saw Liam shaking, holding the smoking pistol. Voodoo looked at Silas and saw a red splotch on his chest, which was rapidly growing larger. His mouth was agape, and it seemed like he was trying to speak, but could not. He fell to his knees, and then forward onto his face. Voodoo's gaze snapped back to Liam and their eyes met. At first they gave each other shocked looks, as if neither of them could believe what the paramedic had done. Then their faces grew serious as they each realized they both had a job to do. Voodoo rushed to the scavenger and rolled him onto his side to get a better look at the entrance wound. He attempted to clamp down on the bleeding, but found it difficult with the injury to his shoulder. As Liam reached Voodoo and the scavenger, the knight gestured towards the hole in the scavenger's chest. "Pressure! Pressure!" the knight ordered, and the paramedic immediately took over for him. Liam looked up at Voodoo and asked, "Do you think the projectile might still be inside?" Voodoo knew enough about his pistol that he didn't need to look at the exit wound to answer. "No. Hildy, medkit." Another compartment on Voodoo's armor opened. He removed the package from it, and the pair got to work. This concludes our Royal Mirror audio story for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If there's an additional part to the story, it should appear in the description below when it is available. I'd like to take this time to thank all of the creators of the open source content used in this video, the ultimate creator, without whom any further creation would be impossible, and of course you, the viewer, for listening to it. Until we meet again, goodbye.